Erica is the president of a direct solution. She has been an expert at direct response and fundraising for over 35 years. Before opening a direct solution in 2003, she worked for organizations spearheading fundraising campaigns, raising millions of dollars, acquiring and retaining thousands of donors, and developing planned giving programs. She is also the author of Monthly Giving, The Sleeping Giant, and she is an avid blogger and fundraiser in her own community. So I'd like to welcome Erica.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about direct mail today. So why should we still be concerned about direct mail? What's the big deal? Because don't we want to do everything online? Isn't that a lot easier, a lot cheaper, right? Well, the reality is that direct mail still works. If anybody tells you that it doesn't work anymore, that's not true. It totally works. I mean, I work with a lot of organizations of different levels, and I do a lot of their direct mail campaigns, and I help them with their monthly giving. So I'm all about like small donors and trying to increase their giving and get them to give more often and ongoing. So it's all about that. So people, human beings, they like to touch things, right? They might even want to take things to the bathroom, you know, so they want to do things like they're still human beings. They still want to communicate through touching things and hugging each other, and, you know, so that's all. We're human beings. We're not robots, right? So that's the big reason why direct mail still works, because people like to touch things and open things and see things. The other thing is that direct mail, while it might direct people to go online, you know, like while we all say that, hey, online giving has increased, well, the reality is that a big reason why that is because people got a direct mail piece. Why do people still get catalogs? Because the minute you get a catalog, you open it up and say, oh, geez, oh, that's a great dress. Let me check that out. You go online, right? Or you get a book and you get a book catalog and you might say, oh, I've always wanted to read that book. Let me go order it online. So it's a big driver for online giving. But the reality is that last year, 7% of donations came in online. That means that 93% of donations came in offline from other sources. So that's a really important statistic, right? So the other thing is direct mail still responds at much higher levels than online giving, than emails. So that's something to consider. So the big thing that I always find when I talk to nonprofits is that a lot of times they look at one piece of all of the metrics. A lot of times people say, oh, direct mail is so expensive. Well, the reality is that's all relative, right? Because it's much more important, like how much money did you raise? It could be that a package costs you $5,000 to mail to 5,000 donors, but if you're raising $100,000, who cares that it costs $5,000? But people sometimes get hung up on that. So it's really important to realize what are the metrics that you need to measure. And I see some nodding heads here. So what are the metrics that you need to measure to see if direct mail is valuable or not? And here they are. I mean, when you're looking at direct mail, you got to track, obviously, how many people are mailed, how many responses you got, what your gross revenue was, what the cost was of the package, what the net revenue was, the average gift, and then what was your return on investment? Or what we like to use is what was the cost to raise $1? So how do you calculate cost to raise $1? It's the cost divided by the revenue. So if it costs you $1,000 to send a mailing to 500 donors and you raise $5,000, your cost to raise $1 is 20 cents. That's very good. And that's about what we're seeing for industry average. Look at this. Direct mail acquisition, so that's like when you're trying to bring in new donors, that still costs typically more money than you're generating. But the minute you're bringing in new donors, it starts paying off and they start making money. So that's the most expensive piece. But special events, a lot of people, a lot of board members especially say, oh, let's do another special event, right? Well, that costs a lot of money. 50 cents to raise $1, and that's not even counting your time. That's just like all of the invitations and everything else that you have to do. And then direct mail to prior donors, to existing donors, that's about 20 cents to raise $1. But like I said, you can, and we can look at what you're seeing in your organization, but a lot of the smaller organizations especially, they're often seeing much better results than that. I have organizations that it costs 5 cents to raise $1. So where do you get that in the stock market? Nowhere, right? And the stock market is doing really well, right? So that's just something to consider. So this is a very important chart to show to the boss and board that says, okay, well, how do we evaluate what we're doing and how much money we're bringing in? And then monthly donors, I mean, we talked to, some of you were at the session yesterday where we talked about monthly donors. So the cost to raise $1 there is 2 to 5 cents. So again, those are small donors that are going to stay with you for a very long time.
Can you talk about that for a minute?
About monthly donors? I'm going to talk about it a little bit more,
Okay.
about monthly donors, or like as in how it works.
No, I'm familiar with the concept.
Yeah.
How is that number generated?
It's generated because the typical monthly donor right now is giving $23 a month. So that's $276 a year. So if you look at the fact that it doesn't, you can use direct mail and email and telemarketing typically to generate new monthly donors. So the cost is relatively low.
Okay.
So that's how we got to that. So in essence, you're generating a mid-level donor. But you have to use the annualized revenue. So that's a big factor to bear in mind there. So, but it's a lot of money. It's the industry average right now is $23 a month. So one of the things that when we start working with an organization, you always want to look at what were their prior results. And then you're going to build on that, right? So this is an example of a real human service organization on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. And they had a new executive director. And the executive director didn't necessarily know what had been done before. That happens a lot, right? Where there's not a lot of history. For some reason, all the reports were magically disappearing. I don't know how that works, but so they really didn't know what had happened. So we said, let's look at sending out a mailing and see how we do. And this was a year-end appeal. And they, like I said, they didn't even know when they last had mailed to their donors. And we broke it out in different segments, and I'm going to take you through those segments in a minute. But they mailed about 3,000 donors, and they got 19% response rate. And the cost was $3,400. And they raised almost $95,000. So the cost to raise it all was 4 cents. That was fantastic, right? So again, they could never have done that any other way. They could not have raised that money any other way. So it was a very, very great mailing. So then when we knew that result, then we would work that into the plan. So because I always like to work with a plan. I'm an Excel person. I love seeing things on a chart. I'm very visual, so I need to see that plan. And it's important that when you create a plan, you're actually going to achieve results. And it's just like when you write down goals, you're going to reach your goals. When you create a plan, you're much more likely to actually raise more money. So just take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to share with you, I think Joel is going to do a follow-up. We're going to share with you some sample plans that you can take and actually use to create the plan for your organization, because every organization is different. Some already have a lot of donors, others have like smaller numbers. There's some people in here that are relatively young organizations, and there's some much more mature organizations that have done a lot of work in the past. So a plan looks at who are your target groups, what's the timing, how often should you be appealing to your donors, what does the creative look like, and how are we going to produce it? And then, again, what are the results? Were the results what I was expecting them to be, right? So let me ask you this question. when you look at direct mail, what do you think is the most important thing that you have to make a decision on? When you look at a direct mail piece, what do you need to decide on? Who? Okay, great. That's totally true. 50% of your results comes from who you're mailing it to. And where are you spending most of your time? Okay, all right. So I just want to make that point. People agonize about the letter, months about the letter, right? And then, oh, let's just mail it to the people who only gave last year, and then we'll exclude anybody who last gave in the last 3 months, right? That happens all the time. So that's a split-second discussion as opposed to the letter where they spend like a whole month on. So 50% of your results come from who you're mailing it to. 20% comes from the stories and the creative. Another 20% comes from your ask amounts, also very important. And then 10% comes from other things. So this is probably everybody knows this. Why do people give? Want to make a difference, okay. Why do people give?
Well, I would think because they were asked.
They were asked. Number one reason why do people give? Because they were asked. If you don't ask them, they want to make a difference, but they're not going to write that check because you didn't ask them, right? So really, really important. In any size organization, there are only 3 ways you can grow. You have to bring in new donors to keep feeding the organization. You can go back to your lapsed donors, those donors that haven't given in a while. And you need to reach out to your existing donors, try to upgrade their gifts, get more money more often or ongoing. There is no other way to raise more money, guys. No other way. So in other words, events fall in that, like everything that we do, major gifts fall in that. But this is the only 3 ways that you can grow as an organization. And unfortunately, we have to do everything, right? But you can combine things. But this is it. There are only 3 ways to grow. So finding new donors, where would you find your donors? I don't know what your organization you are, but where would you find new donors for your organization?
Networking through community groups.
Okay. What organization are you with?
Young Women on the Move.
Okay, all right. So where would you find?
We are a men's fraternity, so our
Alumni, okay, all right.
friends,
Yeah,
parents,
yeah.
family.
So you have that low-hanging fruit. You have existing, what we call like in-house prospects already, right? So if you're a hospital, you have your patients. That would be a really good group to start with. If you are a school, you would have your parents, or a university, you would have your alumni. So some people have those in-house warm prospects that you already have some type of relationship with. That's obviously your best group to prospect in. Again, you just have to start asking for money because they don't necessarily know that you need to raise money, right? So the next thing is that donor lists are available on the market. You can rent the Habitat for Humanity list, okay? You can rent different lists that are out there from big national organizations, and you can ask them for specific areas for the Kansas City area, or you can get the whole state. It depends on how big your reach is. But donor lists are in the market. It costs like $80 to $100 $1,000. So it's not that expensive. Then you can look at residents or taxpayer lists. Those are great lists, and more of them now have overlays that that they're charitable donors, what types of organizations they give to. So that's another great way to look at it. And those are typically even a little bit cheaper than those donor lists. And coming back to donor lists, in some cases you might talk to them and say, hey, we're a local organization. There's another local organization that you might swap lists with, but of course your board needs to approve that, right? So, but swapping costs you less money. A lot of times that way you only pay for the run fees, if you will. It's like $20 $1,000 or something like that. So that's a really cheap way to do it. And then finally, model lists, subscribers to magazines, those are also great lists, and there's a lot has been done on that. There's donor base, there's Wyland Direct, there's a lot of these different companies that offer model lists where they basically take your donor list, hit it against this huge database that they have, and say, okay, well, I know that your organization, we can find other names within this huge database that look like your donors, and then you can test them. And again, that's very affordable as well. So there's a lot of potential there to find prospects for your organization because you need to keep feeding in new blood, right? Because people leave. The other question I have is, what would you consider a lapsed donor? Love to find out. Like how soon or how long can a donor stop, not give, and for you to consider them as lapsed donors?
Ours is 6 to 7 months.
6 to 7 months you're lapsed. Wow, that's fast. Okay. Anybody else? How soon do you consider a donor? 3 years. Okay. All right. 3 years. Okay. 2 years. Okay. All right. Well, the reality is that a lot of times donors don't think of themselves as lapsed at all, even 3, 4, 5 years later. When you ask them and say, well, hey, so what do you think about our organization? You say, oh, I love your organization. And you're almost looking at them like, well, you haven't given in 5 years, So, but that's how it works. So the donors don't necessarily realize that they've lapsed, especially not if maybe you're only appealing to them once or twice a year, right? So that's very important. So the thing is, you can go back to them and see if you can reactivate them. I just did a mailing for a museum on the Cape. We went back 12 years. We got people to give that hadn't given in 12 years. So the mailing made money. It was a membership reactivation campaign. It made money. It was fantastic, right? So again, they just had not reached out to them in a really long time. New executive director, didn't know what had happened in the past. Probably hadn't mailed to them in a while. So again, just like look at that. If you're relatively new to your organization, there might be a potential right there sitting in your donor base. So don't worry about that. This was that same human service organization. Deep lapse, they hadn't given in 6 or more years. They got a 4.5% response rate, which is much higher than what you normally seeing for prospecting, which is usually about 1%, right? So, and it cost to raise $1 was 47 cents. It made money. But look at that, people that hadn't given like between 3 and 5 years, 9.2%. So again, clearly these donors had not been asked in a number of years. That's probably what happened. But again, cost to raise it was great, right? So you've just reactivated all of these donors. So if you're looking at where can I find, how can I grow my organization again, start there. And I know sometimes people say, oh, well, lapse is 2 years. I highly recommend that you just go back even longer than that. But do it at the best time, which is the year end, holiday time frame. That's when people are most likely to give, so that's where I recommend that you go the deepest in your donor base and go back to your lapse. Because it all starts with your donor base. That's the really key here. So love to find out what donor base systems are you using. Anybody who has Raiser's Edge? Okay. Donor Perfect? Bloomerang? Little Green Light? What kind of donor base? Little Green Light, okay. Any other donor bases? All True? Blackboard, right?
I'm thinking about switching to Kindful.
Kindful, okay, yeah.
Salesforce.
Salesforce, okay, yeah. What do you guys use? There's Salesforce, okay. All right, any other, okay. Great, so they're all over the map. So this is just one example. This is actually a Donor Perfect example. So this is one example of what we call like a recency, frequency, monetary value piece that I like to run as a first initial look at saying, how many donors do I have by recency, by level of giving? Because that helps you in the segmentation that you need to come up with. Because that's like, you may want to say, look, anybody who's made a $500 or more gift, I see here that there's, a small number, like say, it's about 200 people or so that have given $500 or more. in the last 2 years. So that could be a number of people that I want to write a personal note to, because I can handle 200 people, right? Some organizations are really, really big, and they say, look, I got to do something else. I might only write a personal note to people who have made a gift of $5,000 or more. So it all depends, but that helps you in your segmentation. So start here. Now, if you can't do this type of segmentation because your donor base doesn't provide it, I recommend that you just do a selection from your database. Just do an Excel spreadsheet. Have all of these sheets on there, and I have a handout as well that shows you what's on that segmentation checklist, if you will. And make sure that you include the last gift date, the last gift amount, and you can sort on it. So it's the easiest thing going. Just take it, do it in an Excel spreadsheet. So, but make sure that you look at that, so that way you know exactly what you have to work with. And you know how many lapsed donors you have, how many active donors you have, how many people that you have in different levels. So, so that's the easiest thing. What I also recommend is that if you know if a donor is an event donor versus a regular, like a previous direct mail donor, because event donors a lot of times do respond differently. But if you have a limited number of donors, you do want to make sure that you reach out to them. And they may have gone to a walk or a run or something like that, and now you can ask them to give a special direct mail appeal, donation to you. So, and then I also recommend that you include the email address if you know it, that you include the phone number if you know it, so that way you have everything in place. You know exactly how many email addresses you have to do a follow-up as well. So, yeah, it's okay. You know all this. All right, so coming back to the same organization that we looked at earlier, we identified a number of different segments. So they wanted to write personal notes to anybody who had made a gift of $250 or more. This is the first time this executive director wanted to send something out. So she was willing to handwrite 625 personal notes. And she did. Took her a while, but she did it, right? And then they had a small monthly donor program. They had about 15 what they call champions. They had, and they wanted to make sure that those monthly donors did get the appeal at the year end, because it was a special message. And then they identified what they call like active donors as those people who had given in the last 2 years, and said, okay, we're going to identify those between 100 and 250, anybody under 100, and then we're also going to go back to those lapsed donors and the deep lapse. So this is just one example of a segmentation breakdown that we were able to track what the results were per segment. Because that's important, because all of these segments do respond and react differently. So once you have that, you can determine what the approach is for each segment. Because again, she was willing to do 600 personal notes. I would have probably said, let's cut that off to $500 or $1,000 and do that. Because again, you just go crazy, but she's still writing, so it was okay. So we talked a little bit about target groups. So that's really, really important. So spend a little bit of time, especially if you need to figure out how many pieces you have to print, how much money you have to spend, right? So spend a little bit of time working with this data. It doesn't cost you much time to do the selection, and then you can know exactly what you have to work with. Timing is important. This is a little chart that shows that obviously the biggest number of donations comes in at the year end. That's just the reality. There's no question, right? But look at how does your donation revenue come in, and then see what can I do to make sure that I have this influx of money during the year. So I'd love to find out how many times, who here mails like once a year to their donors? Okay, one person. How many people mail like twice a year? Okay, purple more, 4 times a year? More? You probably do more. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes, yes, yeah. So it's all over the map, right? But if you're only mailing once a year or twice a year, you can pretty easily add 2 more appeals to it. I mean, my recommendation always to do at least 4 times a year. Reach out to your donors at least 4 times a year. And while the results in the spring are not necessarily going to be as good as the year end, you're still going to make a lot of money. And again, you're just keeping that influx going of donations during the year. Because the reality is, we need to pay the bills all year, right? So that's why it's important to keep adding, to look at what are the times that I need an influx of money that I can add to the appeal timing right now. Go ahead.
So a question. So your recommendation on doing 4 appeals a year, are you suggesting that all 4 of those be direct mail appeals?
Yes.
Or do you have any experience with or
Email?
opinion on mixing it also with email and social media?
What? So I recommend at least 4 appeals a year in direct mail,
Okay.
at least 1 email a month. And then, of course, like once you have email, you can do as much on social media as you can see fit and can do in your organization. So, because they're different types of messaging. So
That's really where my question is going is, are you saying appeals on all of those?
So appeals
Or
are, so direct mail appeals.
Updates, stories?
So social media, the rule of thumb there is 70% what they call fluff, stories, great stuff, good news, thank you, things like that. Oh, wow, this puppy has been helped, whatever, right? So 70%. Then 30% what they call bite. So that's what Sean Triner calls it, like he calls it bite. Okay, so 30% asks, okay, in social media.
Okay.
And then email, again, it depends a little bit. I mean, I like to see at least 1 email newsletter a month and 1 appeal a month, 1 story with a specific ask. But again, every organization is different. So again, you got to do what you can do, right? So so start stepping it up by adding at least something. But so the email newsletter is more cultivation, thank you, updates. The email appeal is an ask. And then 4 direct mail appeals. You can do a lot more. I mean, I work with organizations that mail 15 times a year, and they make money every time. They make a lot of money. So
I'm new to this game.
yes, yeah,
So I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
But I would question, are you not burning your donors out?
You're
By
not.
Asking.
No, I mean,
Do they get to the point of going, oh my God, they're asking me again,
if you do it right, if you thank the donor every time you send them an appeal for their gifts, you tell them the impact that their gift has made. And again, remember, you also have a thank you letter where you can do that in, right? So they're supposed to get a thank you letter as soon as possible after the donation that they made. And then you're telling them, but your gift made a difference. Thank you so much. But let me tell you another story. This is why we need your help again. And it works. 4 times is really, to me, to my experience, is a minimum. Now, again, some organizations have newsletters. Like I have several organizations that have like 2 appeals a year, 3 appeals a year, and 2 hard copy newsletters that also have an ask in it, right? So, so you look at what works for your organization, talk to a couple of donors and see what they like and what they respond to. But the reality is appeals are your most responsive ways to ask for money. It's a story, it's hardcore, it's an immediate need, and so that's what works. You need to raise money, right? So you have to ask. And if you don't ask, you're not going to get. So that's the reality. So don't be too afraid. I mean, there is gurus out there that say that you can ask 21 times a year, even more. And there's proof out there that the more you ask an email, the more money you raise. So we got to be, a little bit careful. Like, if you do it right, the donors are going to say, wow, I love this organization because they always tell me what's going on. And I'm very happy to give again. I mean, lots of animal organizations and children's organizations, they they have so many stories. They can go out in the mail every day and people would give to it, right? So don't be too afraid about that. So, because this is the reason why donors don't give, right? They can't afford the large money. Well, again, if you break it up, for example, in monthly giving is a way. Giving is complicated. Well, this is like, if you put a reply envelope in and make a personalized reply form, it's really easy. All they got to do is pop in the check, right? They don't buy into the organization. You know why they don't buy into the organization? Because you only mail them once a year and that's it. They don't hear from you the rest of the year, right? So they can't buy into the organization because they don't know what you're doing. So this is another function of appeals, right? And then they forget to give again. Well, because you didn't ask them, right? So they're not going to sit there and say, oh, let me, geez, I haven't heard from this organization in 6 months, but I think they're due for a donation. That doesn't work that way, right? So this is the reason why donors don't give. You didn't ask them, right? So, and here's a prime example of an organization where this is a real organization, a homeless shelter on the Cape. And the executive director was like, we don't mail more than twice a year. That's it, because donors don't want to hear from us more often than that, right? And they were struggling because they needed to raise more money, right? Because obviously the service had become more expensive. So he said, well, what if we just add 2 appeals a year, once a quarter? Look at this. They raised more money. They raised 32% more money. So just by adding those 2 appeals a year. Yes, did the cost go up? Absolutely. But they netted a lot more money. $67,000 more. So again, it was totally worth it. And now they're mailing 4 times a year. And then we're always doing an email version of the mailing as well. So creative and production, that's the fun thing, right? That's what next page does, especially here, is always collect stories. Now, I know there's several gurus out there that talk about storytelling, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. You have a lot of stories already in your organization. You just have to start collecting it. Every time a donor says thank you, every time a client says thank you, collect that. You can create a story around it, right? It doesn't have to be a 2-page story that you get for everybody all the time. You can create a lot of things. Your students, volunteers. Volunteers are great sources for stories. They work with these clients. So ask them every now and then saying, hey, what do you think about working with this organization? And they say, yeah, I was talking to a client the other day and they were just blown away with how good he feels, and he has like a house to live in now, and whatever it is that you're doing, right? So there's lots of sources for stories, so just collect them all the time. One of my clients, every week, they look at all of the letters that they get. Again, it's a big religious organization, but every week they look at the letters that they get, and they do a compilation of the positive news that they got out of those letters. And she just types it up, so then we use that for our next mailings, or like we put something on the website, or we put it in a brochure, so we can always look at that like, oh yeah, wow, this is great, I had no idea, right? So there's lots of sources for stories. If you start looking at the letter, what's the most important word that is in your appeal letters? What's the most important word? You. Very good. It's the most important thing. So this is a letter. We send this to the donor. What do they see? You, right? They don't read anything else. So always count your yous in your letters, right? Not we, you. Not about how great you are. It's about how great the donor is when they make a difference to you. That's what's important. And then, and you probably know this at next page, like it's all about readability right now. Here are my readers. I'm 56 years old, right? So I'm, sort of on the bottom end of those baby boomers. A lot of the donors need reading classes. So make it easy for them to read. You're better off having a 2-page letter that the donor can read than having everything squished on 1 page in 9.5 points, right? So make it easy for the donor to read. And make it personal, right as you speak. And I know I deal with a lot of organizations that have these big committees. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they said they had 21 people look at their letter or something like that. So it happens, right? I mean, it happens all the time. So it's not your letter anymore, right? So, you know, make it personal. Make it like a person really, like you write to your grandmother, right? Like you write to your mother. Make it as personal as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, you know? So, and then do put in at least 3 asks. You got to keep repeating to the donor why it's important that they make a gift and how that can make a difference. And does everybody here use a PS? I see lots of nodding heads. Great. Okay. So PSs still work. I know some people say, nobody reads the PS. Well, it's the number one thing that people read. So I was raised in direct mail at Reader's Digest. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So in Amsterdam, I'm from the Netherlands originally. 24 years ago, I moved here. And we had the tremendous pleasure to meet this wonderful young man called Siegfried Vogele. He was actually older at the time, in the 80s. And he has an, how do you call that, institute that does research. It puts like this concoction, it's almost like a virtual reality thing that he puts on people's heads. And he looks at how do people read letters, brochures, reply cards. And it's actually, he's now doing, to your point, like he does this for internet stuff as well. His company does, right? So, because he's passed away in 2002, I believe. So, but he's looked at how do people read? What do they look at? And they prove that these people still read that PS. It's the first thing they look at. They look at who signed the letter. You want to make sure that that signature looks like a real person actually signed it, right? That it's sort of that, there's a lot of psychology when it comes to direct mail as well. But that PS is the number one thing that people look at. All right, and again, we're just going to be in record time here, like going through a lot of different things. I mean, I can talk about direct mail all day, right? So ask amounts are very, very important. 20% of your results come from your ask amount. If there's not one thing that you want to test for your donors, test ask amounts. Don't test what colors envelopes, don't test letters, test ask amounts. That's where your results are going to come from. And I've done a lot of testing with ask amounts. So ask amounts guide the donor. Here's what the reality is. Donors set the price. There is no fixed number that says, okay, well, your organization to help people with rehab, they have no idea what that costs. So we need to tell them, we need to guide them how they can make a difference. So that's what ask amounts do. So if we can tell them that it costs XYZ amount to help a child, then we need to tell them that. So, so think about what you can do in your organization. How much is it per day, per child, per animal, however, you know, per student, however you're serving that. And then you can use that in your ask amounts on your reply form and in your letter. So this is one example. Again, this is like an animal charity, so they can be very specific as to how the amounts were making a difference. We made that selection earlier on with all of those donors. So you have their last gift amount and the last gift date. So you can use that last gift amount to create what we call an ask table. And this is something that you can then give to your printer. I mean, the printer can, or the mailhouse can do it for you as well, or you can give it to them. So do some testing. What would work for your organization? You may have different strategies for different segments. For example, if you're mailing to your monthly donors the year end, you might want to ask them for a special gift and leave the amount blank, because you may not want to go back to them because their gift is $23 a month. So that $23 is too low when you ask them for a one-time gift, so you may want to leave it blank. I always recommend that donors that have given $1,000 or more, I tend to leave that blank as well. That works for most of the organization that I work with. Because it's kind of tacky if you say, well, your last gift of $10,000 and $20,000 and $30,000. That's a little, so you're better off leaving that blank. But donors' last gift times 2, last gift times 3, and other tends to work for most of the organizations. So that's a good basic strategy. But there's lots of, I mean, you probably see lots of research out there about ask amounts. So every organization is different. Try to find what works, but this is sort of the common ground that tends to work for most organizations. So that's a good starting
I
point.
have just
Go
a
ahead.
quick question, because
Yeah.
you mentioned your $10,000 donors.
Yeah.
So for me, I wouldn't even mail to them.
Okay.
Like, that would be more personal. So I'm just curious what you recommend with those higher level donors that give at that level.
It all depends. So in other words, if you know that you have a personal relationship with and you know you can visit them, great. But a lot of times nowadays, donors don't necessarily always want visits anymore. So if you don't send them something, you're not going to get anything. So, you can, and again, you know your donors, right? So those donors that you already have the personal relationship with, that you say, look, I know I'm going to visit them by the end of the month, so that's when I'll ask. Great. But other than that, send them something. You can always do a follow-up, right? But write that personal note on them, saying, I'm going to see you very soon. I wanted you to see this story, whatever it is. But write that personal note on that group, right? So because if you're not going to ask, you're not going to get. If you can't get to them, then they're not going to give you that year-end gift. So that's the reason why I have seen that even those big donors, if you send them something in the mail, they will send you the check, or they might wait for your phone call. But that's a good way to just get in there in the door. So you can raise, otherwise you leave them a lot of money on the table. So and then the other piece is like we talked about ask amounts, we talked about stories and creative, and we talked about segmentation. There are other ways to involve the donors that will increase response. Like here's an example of we put in a little piece of fabric in the mailing and asked the donor to send it back with their personal note on it. And then we said, well, we would put that in a special quilt. This was for the anniversary of the Boy Scouts in this particular case. And it works like a charm. People will have a reason to send you something back, and a lot of times they will send a donation as well. So it's a way to involve the donor, and it's a way for them to get something back, if you will, in return. And this is hanging up in the headquarters. So that's just one way to involve. I work with a religious organization. We send out little candles, and we ask them to send it back, and then we melt that down into a huge candle that we then take to a special place. Works like a charm. So people will always, some people will send the candle back without a donation, but the bulk of them, like 99.9%, will send a donation at the same time as well. So
You send the candle to them, and they
Yeah.
send it back.
we send them a little candle saying, look, what we need you to do is send it back to us so that we know that you want to participate in what the candle campaign, and then they will. So just like a proof that they do that. So they get something else. They get a little picture as well that they can keep. So they do get something that they can keep. So creative and production, that's the fun part, right? That's what we're here for, especially. So closed versus window envelope. Always a big discussion. So most donor organizations, I recommend that you stay with a closed envelope. The donors will know your logo. They will open the envelope. You don't even have to worry about a teaser in most cases. Just make it look as close as possible as if the executive director sat down and wrote a letter to them. So closed envelopes tend to work. Window envelopes are usually used if you have some bigger quantities. It's just a cheaper way to mail, and it works. So in this case, it does have a teaser. It actually has a yellow reply form that's showing through the window. So people are like, oh, what's this? What's this in here? This is like, it makes them open it. So, so it both works. But again, if you're looking at just mailing your donors, stay with the closed window envelope. Postage obviously is a big driver when it comes to what you put on the window. Those high-end donors, those $10,000, mail them first class. Absolutely, mail them first class. You have a personal note in them, make it look really, really personal. But then, of course, as you're getting 200 pieces or more, you can mail nonprofit rate. So why spend 49 cents on a stamp when you can mail at about 16, 17 cents, right? So you can still make it look pretty special by using this nonprofit live stamp. It makes it look very personal. So some folks find that they can get away with like what they call like indicia. So again, it's a pre-printed piece on the outside envelope, but most of the organizations actually like having a live nonprofit stamp. That costs like, I don't know, $5 or $10, $1,000. It doesn't cost much more to do it. Again, makes it look much more personal. So, because the donor just looks at a stamp, they're not going to say, oh, that doesn't look like a forever stamp, or, you know, whatever. It looks like a stamp, right? So that's the key. Then the other piece is like the intelligent mail barcode, very important. It gets you the best postage rates, so you're familiar with that. But what not everybody knows is that if you have that barcode on your outside envelope, you must have it on the reply envelope. You're like nodding this, so that's great, but not everybody knows that. And your mail house or your printer can get that intelligent mail barcode for you. So you just then pop it in your creative, but that's really important. I think the post, and you know, Joel, I don't know, but I think the post office is not necessarily totally, how do you say that, penalizing people for it. But there's some nasty postmasters out there, and if you have one that's not that great, then if they open your piece of mail and they see that you don't have that barcode on there, they can say, well, look, we're going to hold up your mail or whatever it is. So, so that's just something to consider.
It also speeds getting your money.
It speeds getting your mail back as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and that doesn't cost you anything, right? So you just have everything there. And then this is like a example of a reply form. This is a religious organization, so this could be what it looks like before you start personalizing it. And then here's where we filled in the I'll gladly help with the challenge. This was a special challenge. Here's my tax deductible gift of, and this was blank. So this was in this organization. They do this for $250 and more. They do a blank amount for like the bigger donors, if you will. And then you see, the segment code is there. The donor information is all personalized. So this is very easy to do. So you really have no reason not to personalize the ask amounts, especially from your previous donors. You don't ever want to ask a donor who's made a $50 gift for a $25 gift. So you don't want to downgrade them. You always want to try to upgrade them. So that's why that lasering of ask amounts is so important. And then this was the reply form on the back. And then this is an example of a letter. So more and more letters now do have pictures because people have become much more visual. And again, in the old days where 4-color printing was very expensive, that was a big deal, but it's not so much anymore. It doesn't cost much money at all to go for 4-color printing. So,
I had a question about earlier in the presentation you had mentioned how direct mail could convert through a digital interface after. But I'm not seeing
it comes.
so much.
It's coming.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. And again, I'm not, there's not that much on it, but this is still very much about the creative and the production piece, so what you need to put in there. So, like here in this particular case, it was a challenge. You have the personalized ask on the bottom. In this case, it was a relatively low ask. $15 or $30 was the lowest for this particular organization. So religious organizations tend to be smaller amounts. And then again, the whole piece was in 12.5 points. Talk a little bit about the monthly donor piece. Those people who were there yesterday, you can ask on your appeals to add the monthly gift option. So here on the top, you see, yes, I'll help with a gift of $157.50, $87.50, and then I would like to make this a monthly gift. So that's all you have to add to get people to consider a monthly gift as well. So this is becoming more and more common. So you can add that right on there. So to your point, the email and social sharing that you can do to tie in with the appeal. So here's what most of the organization that I work with do is we take their appeal letter. This is an example. This is an organization that deals with people with disabilities. So we use the direct mail piece as a basis, and that goes out in the mail to everybody that we have a postal address for with the different segments, right? The higher end and the mid-levels and the monthly donors. So we mail this out. It's highly personalized. And then 2 to 3 weeks later, we create an email version that goes out to those donors that we have an email address for. So we have a segment that has anybody who got the mailing gets an email follow-up saying, hey, a couple weeks ago I told you a story about, in this case it was Anthony. So, and you just have a short repeat. It's a short email. It has a short repeat of the story, the crux of it, and then has the ask in it that directs them to go and give online. So it goes directly to the donation page. What will happen is some people will say, oh yeah, I have that direct mail piece still sitting on my table, let me send in the check. In other cases, people will go directly online. So that's a way to leverage the work that you already have done. You just repeat the story, repurpose it, if you will. Then we also have a segment that has people that you have in your email database that is not necessarily on your donor base. You may just have their email address. So again, what you can do is you can make a version where, again, you just tell the story. You're not going to refer to the fact that you sent them the direct mail piece, but you just tell the story and ask them for money. So again, you're repurposing something that you've already done. And then once you have that email, you can then do the social share. So if you had a video, for example, of this particular person, you could use that. So this is just one way to repurpose what you've already done and give them a little boost. And you do see that you all of a sudden, like you start getting a couple more checks in that you otherwise would not have gotten. So that's just one way to add the email version.
I guess,
Yeah.
just for a second.
Yeah.
The question in particular was on the give forms themselves.
Okay.
Because I see entry for credit card number and expiration date, and with security, bank security, and all these things going on, I know I'm hesitant to put my credit card number on a piece of paper and put it in the mail.
Right.
I'm a lot more apt to go
Right.
to a QR code and put it online, for example. And so that also speaks to the age segmentation also, that you did segmentation on giving amounts, but I was curious on age segmentation also.
Well, see, the problem is that a lot of times from your donors, you don't know what their age is unless you ask them. Like I have some religious organization where we say, well, we'll pray for you on your birthday. So in that case, we actually get their information. Some, we do a survey, so then we get a little bit more information. But a lot of times you don't necessarily know what the age group is. We just know that the average age is like 60 plus years old. And there's some studies out there, I'll be happy to share it, over where are we in like the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and on the millennials, like how do they give right now? So there's studies being done there. But to your point, On the reply form, in a lot of cases, we say, you can also give online, go to this URL. So that's what people would do if they're not comfortable giving out their credit card information. I know that the ASPCA, that's one of the top 50 mailers in this country, when they do a prospecting mailing, they get about 10% of people that go online. So they still get 90% of people that send in the check or give the credit card information on the form, but they are able to track that 10% of donors that new donors that give online. So there's definitely that trend, absolutely. So that's why if you can set up a special URL so that you know that it's tied to that campaign, that's ideal. I don't see QR codes, to be honest, that often with nonprofits. It's just having that special URL is enough. So they're just, but great question, thank you. So does anybody here still produce their mailings in-house? Okay, so, all right. A little bit, okay. So a lot of times it's always a matter of like, again, is it a big donor mailing? What are the quantities, you know? And again, the quantities will typically dictate that, but time is money. So like I said, I work with a lot of organizations and they say, look, I wish I had more time, I wish I had more time, and then, oh, we're so busy with our appeal. And what they forget is that the 2 weeks that it took them to coordinate the volunteers that come in and do the stuffing and, you know, all of that. So, your time is worth money. If you can meet with a $10,000 donor, that's where your time is much better spent than sitting there stuffing your envelopes, right? Because that's why you have wonderful printers and mail houses that can do that for you, and a lot of times they can do it much better because they can also do a lot other things that you possibly can't do yourself. So because they get you that postage discount, they can do that intelligent mail barcode on there. They can run your data through the national change of address, right? Every organization has to run their donor base through national change of address every 95 days. So now again, if you're not mailing that often, make sure that you at least run it through national change of address before you mail, right? Ask for that information back. Again, they're not going to necessarily give it to you automatically. You have to ask for it. But they can give it to you, and it doesn't cost anything else. It should not cost anything extra to do that, right? But make sure you get it back because then you can update your database. And there's a lot of other things that is available now that you can use to enhance your data. Like you can get email addresses for those people that you don't have email address for. You can get phone numbers. We can also do like what we call like a reverse append. So if you have email addresses and you don't have their postal address, there is a service out there that will provide that information back to you, and you can then mail them as a prospect. They already have you already have a relationship with them, and that works really, really well in your mail. So there's lots of things, and I know there's now services out there that actually even know Facebook accounts. So so you can do a mailing, you can do an email follow-up, and then you can do some posts like to the Facebook, and you know that they got that mailing, so you can be very, very targeted. So finally, of course, you want to get results from your mailings, right? That's a key here. So this is an example of that organization that we looked at earlier. Now, I know there's a lot of it, and you will get these slides afterwards. Joel, I think you're going to email them, right? So you can look at that. But, you know, the personal note group had a 19% response rate. Cost to raise $1 was a penny. So that was very, very worth it. And then, you know, it goes down. But you can clearly tell that this particular organization had not done anything in a while. Because normally we see that you get like about 10 to 15% from your existing donors. That's a very typical response in the year end. So, and it goes down from that. Like lapsed donors, it's usually like 2%. So if you get better results, that's great. So again, it's worth it, right? So if you can reactivate a lapsed donor at a lower cost than it would cost you to bring in a new donor, it's totally worth it. So always make that those results. Because response is one of the 5 keys of successful direct mailing. And if you have that, the other 4 don't matter. So it's all about response and results. So you'll grow only if you ask and have a plan. So again, you have to have a direct mail plan, really important, because if you write it down, you will accomplish it. So you ready to raise some more money? Great. Okay, any more questions?